It's the end of 2026, 2025. I'm tired. And for this like series of conversation, I thought we may as well start with the thing that I've been speaking about the most, which is like, what does it mean to decolonize technology and why is it so important? I guess some introductions would be useful for anybody who's watching. So, I'm Lisa Adams. I'm the founder of Citizen Code. I've been building social impact technologies for the past 15 years across the global south. I'm really committed to the ways in which technology can be used as a tool to uplift communities. And yeah, that's been my journey so far. And lately, I've been thinking very deeply about what it means to take our own approaches. And we're going to get into that a bit in this conversation about moments of realizing or questioning why we do things the way that we do it and is it the right way. So, Samson.
Hello, anyone watching? I'm Samson from Nairobi, Kenya, and I also work as a designer and a researcher. And I've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years. But initially, I've also done a lot of software engineering, so that was what I studied at the university. And now found myself in the intersection of, trying to bring that technological interventions into the actual human experiences, while keeping in mind, how do you do that for the global south, for example, and how do we do it in a way that really resonates with the local communities? Yeah, and happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Lauren Powell. I'm an archaeologist, a paleoanthropologist, and I am trying to carve a path into technology as a digital anthropologist, or as Lisa likes to call it, a cultural technologist. I think that I've studied contact points between colonization and African civilizations and two different populations meeting and what that looks like historically. So, I think looking to the future of technology, sometimes we have to look back into the past. And I really like talking about humans and technology through time.
Decolonize technology. I think this is felt in some spaces like profanity, and has caused a lot of discomfort in the room. But with the space that we're in this like digital revolution, artificial intelligence, I guess I've found it kind of interesting that suddenly people are questioning and care about what happens to humans and how humans are impacted by the use of technology, where we've been thinking about this, Samson, for our entire careers, is building social impact technology. So I guess what I'd like us to talk about is just like what that actually means to each of us. Decolonizing tech in your own ways, Lauren. You've just come into the tech industry, so I'm so curious to hear what you've observed so far. But for me, it's it's the true accountability towards centering communities who need these interventions the most. And for a long time, my work has centered the girl child, and that's um, mostly the girl child in the setting of the global south. So, as I've moved through this work and as a woman of color, along the way, I've learned assimilation to be sort of how I've navigated to getting to where I needed to be. And by assimilation, I mean assimilation to Western methodologies, Western thinking, Silicon Valley thinking. And after 15 years, my own growth is, being the girl child at some point in my life, coming out of those communities, getting an opportunity, building myself up as a technologist. There came a point where I stopped and went, wait a minute, who said that we should do things this way? And who who is at the center of this work, not only from a focal point of view that there's an end user that is a girl child, but everything that comes before that, the donors, the strategy, the implementation methods, the observability, through who we choose as vendors to do the work, and proximity to communities have all become important. So I think for me, like Samson, I'd like to first think about this from the design community, because you usually touch on context and research as our first step to designing a platform. What does all of this mean for you?
I wish I had like a direct response to that question.
Yeah.
Because often at times you find if you walk into the community, I think it just comes down to you as an individual. Are you having that moment of reflection to think to yourself, like, what do I know? What are some of the influences that I'm walking into this community with, right? And how does it influence the things that I'm trying to get out of the community? And essentially, I'm gonna speak from my experience doing design and research. You would find that sometimes when you go into the community and you're trying to do a study about the way the community does certain things, and you go there with a mentality of like, oh, I'm learning. You don't go in like, oh, I'm an expert and I'm here to show them how to do things, or I'm here to sort of like score them based off their output and their approaches of doing things. And it comes down to reflecting like, okay, what am I coming into this community with as an influence, coming from where I grew up, for example, or what I've been taught. But I think I love the idea of what you're mentioning, which is the things. I went to school, maybe I studied design, for example, right? Who taught me? In what ideologies were those classes based on, right? And how is that influencing the way that I'm approaching or going into these communities? And I loved what you had mentioned, which I think is called, there's an ideology from Ghana, which is called Sankofa. And what it means essentially means go back and get it. You cannot move forward without looking back into the history and really understanding like what was really done previously to understand what is actually happening today. So I don't think I have a very direct response to your question, but to me, essentially, the most important piece is how do you decolonize yourself, right? How do you make sure that, you recognize your own personal influences? You recognize the fact that you're coming into these communities as somebody who is coming in to learn and not necessarily to show them that this is the way to do it or to change their ways of lives. And I think of design and essentially as well research as process of me going into the community to really understand like, okay, let me just sit back and observe how are they actually doing their ways. What are some of the innovative solutions that they might be already deploying in these communities, and how can we use that as a process to really help elevate any other innovations that we're trying to bring into the community essentially. Yeah, that's what I can say for now.
But we're playing past the mic today. I think that's like a perfect segue, Lauren, into how we think about power, culture, and history when we are designing technology. The thing about technology that technologists that has frustrated me historically is how attached we are to our ideas about how things work and methodology. But if we want to include languages and cultures and experiences and history, we have to be flexible and expandable. And it's made me realize that we're actually missing someone in the room. It's not to take away from the design space or take away from methodology, but to actually enrich it. And archaeology has a strong role to play, especially when designing for the Global South communities, in terms of understanding people, environments, and power. So with that said, decolonizing technology, what does that mean to you and Citizen Code?
You know what's so funny is when we say the word decolonize, we go, it's a total restructuring. And I don't think it's that. I don't think we need to destroy frameworks and create new ones. I think it's, as you said, it's an expansion. But also I think it's a reframe. A lot of the things when it comes to science and technology, we think they are Western ideologies, but a lot of them have histories in African, Indian, Arabian civilizations. The way we understand the eye to work, the way photography works comes from Arabian philosophers. Correct me if I'm wrong. Origins of it's not always Western. And so we're quick to push that away and be like, oh no, it's Western, it's not going to work. We need to excavate, we need to dig deeper as to where it comes from, why sometimes what we think is Western ideologies or methodologies actually isn't. And sometimes those things work or still work. So it's about expanding, it's about looking on the other side of the moon. Sort of, the moon is rotating, we see different sides. Sometimes it's waxing and waning, and we would like to shine a light on so much more. So I find that really interesting. When it comes to expanding, I think we all understand or experience ways of life so differently, and we make so many assumptions that the way I've experienced life is the way you've experienced life, even on an individual level. So when we step back and we make cultural assumptions, which anthropologists do, like there's a level of assumption that we make, we end up losing the user. You're going to lose the end user to a certain degree. So how do we personalize things? How do we make them culturally relevant? I mean, South Africa alone, Cape Town alone, is incredibly culturally diverse. What brings us all together? Rugby. That's how diverse we are. Rugby and Nelson Mandela sometimes. But so how do we step into multiculturalism? What I like is that for design, we don't have to recreate the wheel per se. I think we can, as we look back, and I think in a materialistic or materialism world where people have left behind their designs in archaeology, we get to echo that understanding that we're not alone. It may not be novel, it may not be new, and it still works. So that for me has been really interesting.
Yeah, rugby. Hey, yeah, I think for me, I've realized that this has become important and that we're not speaking about this enough. But it also comes from a place of like, traditionally, the technology industry has been a male dominant industry. It's something that is shaped in the global north and adopted and adapted in the global south. And it frustrates me because, like you say, we have mechanisms of care, of solutions here, and very often I actually see that our solutions are quite effective. It's just not spoken about enough. When you look at platforms like M-Pesa in Africa versus like your PayPal that you have in the USA, I think we have for a long time needed to think deeply, often being under-resourced, with little capacity, and still make things work. Like if I take it back to just even my childhood and my upbringing, we didn't have a lot, and I had a matriarch of a grandmother who had to make things work and take care of everybody in a household and their children and the neighbors and their children and somebody else who was in need at the time. So we are built with resilience and built with innovative thinking. Innovation isn't born in the West. Innovation comes from resilience, from struggle, from challenge, and creativity. That said, it's been a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation for me when I bring it up, and I see it as my sort of role to play. The role that I do in sort of restructuring power dynamics, is to say the uncomfortable thing. But I want to talk about the discomfort for a moment, because I think it's important for people to understand that what you're trying to do is not erase or take away from what's been done. It's not to say that the West is wrong. It's to say that what works for you there. And what works for us here. And we can share our frameworks and learn from each other. But it's not that the one is leading the other, where I think it gets a bit tricky. So like recently I've been in talks where I speak about this because it's an interesting dynamic, tech and social impact. Because tech on one hand has a huge inequality issue, right? A gender issue, a racial issue, a lot of issues. And it's advancing very, very fast. And then you've got the social impact sector, and there's a bunch of just like politics around how things are funded, who funds it, how we determine success for communities in need or impoverished communities. And finding the balance when you're using technology to solve social impact problems. I feel like we need to get comfortable with the discomfort real quickly, because it's going to become significantly more important who you choose to design and how we support technology organizations like Citizen Code, of course, in contributing to new frameworks and new methodologies and new thought processes, and not being stuck in an echo chamber of design and method, right? And so my heart is a little broken when I sit in those spaces and I can see the discomfort. I can see the distance that gets placed between me and other organizations, and the gatekeeping or the glass ceiling, There's only so much I can do until I say that word, decolonize tech. That's a bit too uncomfortable for us. But through innovation for communities and for social impact, there's always come with facing hard truths. And that's in the best interest of the community. So I question whether our hearts are in the right place as social impact organizations, and what true impact actually means, which we'll talk about in the next episode. Are there any thoughts that come to mind for you, Samson?
Yeah. The answer is yes. So many thoughts.
We need like a 20-part series.
When you're saying that, I couldn't help but think through, essentially what it means to actually do it the right way. What is the right way of doing these processes? And having been on both sides of the worlds, I would say, like, designing for let's say the developed world compared to like the developing side of the world, as we've come to know them, I think it's a continuous learning process. No one has really figured it out, right? And I think staying on that state of inquiry, self-reflection. Am I actually even the right person to be talking about this right now? What are sort of like, what makes me the person? And I think the key tool here is, can I still remain in the moment of inquiry? Could there be a better way to do this process? And when you talk about tools and frameworks, I think what I've come to learn is it's not about like, oh, this or the other. Give me all the available tools that have been developed before, right? Let me have a look at that. And I think of it as like, okay, you want to go from point A to point B. This is a pathway that you could take. I look at the tool as a possible pathway, not as the mandatory pathway to get there. We know where the destination is, but these are just pathways that you could possibly take.
Yeah.
And it's not, it shouldn't feel like if you took that pathway, then you're stuck with it. If you learn halfway there that this is not really getting you the results that you're looking for, it should be as flexible as leave the tool, look for another alternative approach. And it also leaves you at a space of, could I also come up with my own tool that resonates with this very context that I'm dealing with? Because it is very possible that there isn't a tool that exists that is perfectly designed for that pathway. And once you pilot or use your tool and it actually gets you even further down the line that you are initially expecting, then bring that tool, let it be part of our pool of frameworks and toolkits that we can actually use to explore. But my final reflection on this essentially is, and something that I've personally struggled with as a designer or a researcher, if I look back what I studied in school, these were really best of tools that were developed for a certain context, which is totally different for the context that we are trying to design for right now. And even the context that we are trying to design for is as complex as it gets. And everybody knows that. Like when you talk about a human being, we have very complex emotions. I'm going through so many of them right now, and I can't really explain what they are, essentially. And think of it as, I'm trying to design for somebody, or you are trying to design for my problem, but you can't really feel and experience 100% of my thought processes and the struggles that I might be going through. So what is the best way of you coming in to really purely try to come as close as you possibly can? And the only way to achieve that is through a point of inquisition. Like, could I just have a listening moment?
Right.
I'm just going to be listening, but I'm also listening with a mindset of, I'm here to learn. I'm definitely going to be learning something new from you, as opposed to, the usual way of thinking or the default way, which is, oh, I'm coming from like a very point of a higher level of experiences, and I'm here to show you what is the right way to do. And that's why I think it's a very difficult process to try to achieve. If you've already labeled me as a senior researcher, I'm already walking in with some point of leverage, but that leverage is the thing that will actually get me away from the solution.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the two things that came up for me was I think it's best fit and adaptability. So we think, oh, tool A or tool B, but what if we have a bigger toolbox? And what if we get to change the type of screwdriver that you have? You know, you have those adaptable screwdrivers for whatever fit. Sometimes it's a star, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's something really different. And the more tools you have, the more adaptability, the more you can get the work done. The other thing that came to mind was something in archaeology. We study sort of contact. When we study contact between two populations, before they've associated power with one or the other, we look at the fringes and how that overlays in material tools. And you'll find that, say, a European group comes to Cape Town, they meet herders. The fringes are the people that are meeting. So the fringe people on the settler side and the colonizer side, and the fringe people of the herders will swap tools. But the thing that permeates into the rest of the group of the herders are only things that are relevant and works for them. There's not this one on top of the other, the one completely takes over until there is a power dynamic. So when you're sitting there and you're not too sure, and you see each other eye to eye, peer to peer, there's more exchange in, I think, a healthier, innovative way, as opposed to you need this to survive, which is very interesting. But I think that it's best fit and adaptability. And in an ideal world, the end user would be able to adapt any tool or a blank tool to best fit whatever they need.
This was absolutely one of my favorite conversations with the two of you. I think to round it up, I'm not sure that we're doing tech for social impact anymore, but just that tech should, no matter what industry you're in, whether commercial or in the social impact industry, should have a consciousness for having a positive impact on the humans who are experiencing or using their platforms. Thank you, guys.